Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you especially to the people who make this possible for you with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. So I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Chris Kempshall back to the show. Here is what you need to know about Chris. He is a historian and author who has written widely on the First World War and on the ways modern media, particularly video games and the Star Wars franchise, portray history and war. He is president of the International Society for First World War Studies and a senior research fellow at the Center for Army Leadership, Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. He co-authored Star Wars Battles That Changed the Galaxy and has waited to write this particular book for most of his life. He lives in the UK with his partner and a fish tank. And the book that he's referring to, of course, is The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. And I am thrilled to welcome him back to the show. He was previously with us talking about his book, The History and Politics of Star Wars. So yeah, he's got a very solid grounding in this particular subject matter, and his passion for the topic is going to be evident very quickly. So yeah, let's just get into it. Without further ado, here's the first part of my conversation with Dr. Chris Kempshall, author of The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. Chris Kempshall, welcome back to Star Wars 7x7. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on. And in fact, we've met in person since the last time we did this. The joy of Celebration London when everybody came to me.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like I'm a bit remiss. Were you a doctor at that point, or is this a recent development?
No, I was a doctor. I mean, it's odd. I've been a doctor since like 2013, but this is the first time that, even including any of my academic books, that like doctor has been put on the front cover of any of my books. It just never normally comes up before. With the academic books, it's like it's a given. And then I think for DK, they were like, we're gonna put doctor on the front of it.
Yeah, let's lean into
go
that.
ahead. Yeah, 100%. I mean, a few of the other Star Wars authors have now started kind of referring to me in like text messages as Dr. Chris. It's like that's not going away anytime soon. But I have been doctored for some time now.
I have a friend who's an economist, and I refer to him as doctor every time I see him, like, hello, doctor. And, you know, it is a term of affection because it's a lot to earn a doctorate. I mean, It deserves, kind of respect. And especially, I think, too, I don't know if you experience this, but as a doctor who is not a medical doctor, then perhaps, people go, well, you're a doctor, and don't necessarily.
Yeah, we're not going to call on you if there's a problem on the plane. But
right.
But then I was like, occasionally I'd get emails from Lucasfilm and they're like, hi, Dr. Kemp. So it's like, we've met. Like, we've had conversations. You don't have to do that. You can just call me Chris.
Well, Chris,
thank you.
You are back on the show because you have written The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which is fantastic, by the way. And
thank you.
Congratulations. I mean, this is a huge, big deal. So first of all, can you tell me how the project came about?
Yes. So it's been kind of a slow burning, long running, and then an incredibly short burning one, depending on point of view. So obviously I got contacted by DK for Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which we've spoken about on the podcast before, and that was, I know, August 2020 time period. And then, everything was all about battles. But I decided very, very early on that, like, am I ever going to get a better time to pitch a book to DK and Lucasfilm? So I floated the idea with the editor David Fenterman then, and it was very much like, let's do battles and we'll see how things pan out. And then it must have been maybe in the lead up to Celebration Anaheim, which was May 2022, May 2022, something like that. I met up with David in London to talk about, because it was going to be my first celebration. So I was pretty excited about that. And we were talking about that. And then kind of started putting the wheels in motion then to see whether or not Lucasfilm would bite at this idea if we presented it in the right way. And most of 2022 was kind of working through the pitch process, and everything takes an incredibly long time, which is unusual to me because academic publishing can take a long time, but it's a different kind of passage of time.
Right.
And then towards the end of 2022, we signed a contract for the book, and then I put together like a breakdown of the book and like a sample chapter, and I sent that off to Lucasfilm ahead of Celebration London. So when we met for our little 7x7 chat in
Yeah.
London, the contract was signed, the book was already underway by that point. And then the major writing process started probably around May, June time last year. And
Mm.
then last year was like, now please write book. And kind of finished the draft in kind of December, January time, and then lots of editing and like, but that was kind of the lineage of the book. But it was my idea. I wanted to do it, and David has got a background in archaeology and history, and he got it. He got the
Mm.
idea, and then we just had to position it in a way that would allow us to do the book.
Right. And so when you were planning to go to Celebration in Anaheim in
Yeah.
22, was it because you were doing promotional stuff related to Battles of Chains of Galaxy, or were you just going as a fan,
It
or?
was it was because I was doing something for Battle, so I was going to be on the publishing panel because the pandemic had kind of completely kind of shut down all forms of convention. Like Battle's never actually got like its publicity moment in the sun.
Right.
I was there for a panel for Battlers and then a couple of signings, which meant that I actually got to meet Amy Radcliffe, Jason Fry, and Cole Horton, the co-authors. Otherwise, I would never have had the opportunity to meet
Hmm.
them potentially. And whilst I was there, I kind of briefly flagged up with Mike that there was something coming through, who's head of Lucasfilm Books, that there was going to be me and David Fenterman had an idea about something, and he was like, "We like pitches, so I'll look forward to hearing that about that." So yeah, it was a kind of a double benefit, but also I went into Celebration just so spectacularly ignorant of everything. It was my first Star Wars celebration, and people were talking like, this is going to happen, and you'll get a chance to talk to these people, and that's going to happen. It's like you're. I have no concept of what it is, like no frame of reference for
Hmm.
all of these things that people are talking about, and you say, oh, you're going to want to make sure that you catch like the running of the hoods. It's like the running of the what?
Yeah.
I'm, me, I'm a Star Wars fan, but that's a very specific celebration form of
Yes.
Star Wars fandom. If you
Right.
haven't been there and seen it, it's utterly meaningless.
Hmm. That's right. And now in London, there was a new tradition initiated with the No Way Out folks,
Yeah,
all the Narkina 5 running.
which was amazing, and I absolutely loved seeing. Which everything about it made me very happy. Getting COVID at Star Wars Celebration London was not quite the high point. Was my legacy of that, and I don't think I was alone in that. But
No,
the
you were not. And I hope I didn't give it to you. And maybe I hope I didn't get it from you.
no, no, no. I think if your experience was anything like mine, at the end of that first day, there was like a realization like I can mask up as much as I want to, but I will live with the consequences of what's happening around me.
Yep. Yeah. My experience was very similar to that.
Yeah. But the
So,
Narkina 5 stuff was great. I mean, just
oh,
Star
yeah.
Wars Celebration's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I must have seen you in Anaheim in May of 2022. And I'm grateful that we were able to connect. And I love that you're sharing the whole process and the timeline of this too, because I'm thinking back to, I believe it was maybe August of 2022 when you and I were talking on the podcast about the history and politics of
Yeah.
Star Wars. And to know that also that was going on in the background, I mean, it's fun to think about. And I'm not the kind of person to be like, how come you didn't mention that, like, but still, it is really amazing to know that these things are happening in the background. And
Yeah.
it does take, I guess it takes as long as it takes, right?
It takes as long as it takes, and there's always an element, someone at any point could say no, and it's not out, they're not being vindictive, they're not being mean or anything like that. It's just because, oh, actually, we're working on a new TV thing in 3 years' time, and this is going to, and you never know any of those things until it
Hmm.
happens. So there's no, whilst all the signs are good, it's a good sign, but it's not a book until the contract's signed. Until the contract's signed, it's just everybody kind of keeping their fingers crossed and hoping that well, certainly in my case, that the biggest dream I had at the time and in my life to date, possibly so far, was about to come true.
So yeah, I'm gonna ask you a little bit later. I'm just gonna ask you to put this in your head what the
Yeah.
next big dream is. Like if you've already thought about that, don't answer that yet.
No, no, I'll put a pin in that.
In the meantime, like I want to circle back to Battles and the fact that it's kind of a different book comparatively speaking. I mean, they are both history books in their way,
Yeah.
and they are both written by in-world historians in their way. But how was this particular book different for you than Battles was?
So there's a variety of kind of differences. I mean, firstly, Battles was a co-authoring experience, so it was far more kind of cooperative. It was co-authoring and cooperative in kind of like slightly interesting ways. So, I'd be in contact with Amy and Jason and Cole and David Fenterman at DK, and if we had any questions, and we'd see what we each other were putting in. But at the same time, it's like, well, these are my block of chapters to write. If they may not interact with anybody else on the outside. So there was kind of bits and pieces going on, kind of cooperative and then kind of solo working with that. And obviously, Battlers is a far more visual book. There's
Hmm.
lots and lots of images in Battlers and spread across a massive time period. Um, and the other kind of major difference was Battlers wasn't my idea. I was 100% on board with it. Like, yes, fantastic. I will. Which of my arms do you want to enable me to write this? I'm right-handed, so we should probably hold on to that one. But
Hmm.
yeah, I'm willing to give you this left arm. Um, but in that sense, there was no kind of like personal ownership of the idea. I think it probably came organically from DK. I think it was probably one of DK's ideas, and they kind of
Hmm.
decided to kind of then start bringing people in. Whereas Rise and Fall was my idea, and I felt a degree of ownership over that idea. And there was never like a question of, oh, maybe we should get another author in to kind of help spread the load of this a little bit. Um, and I was fine with that because speaking relatively selfishly, I didn't want to share. I didn't want to share my idea. I wanted to do it myself.
Right.
Um, but there's also so with battles, whilst battles covers, there are a lot of battles in battles, as
Yeah.
the name might suggest. There's nothing in there that doesn't have images attached to it because that's the nature of the book, and we've seen the Battle of Endor, so we can put it in the book. We
Hmm.
know there are TIE fighters and TIE interceptors and Star Destroyers and all that, those bits and pieces. With Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, to tackle something like the Galactic Empire, there's a tremendous amount of stuff in there that we haven't seen, that
Hmm.
has never appeared on screen, but that everyone kind of accepts is probably what the Empire would be up to, because the Empire is populated by a collection of scumbags, and scumbags are going to do what scumbags are going to do.
Yeah.
So this is probably the type of thing that the Empire would do, but it's never actually appeared or been fully established. So there were a lot of gaps that we had to fill in writing the Rise and Fall in ways that felt plausible with how people kind of understood the Empire without ever actually seeing it. So in
Hmm.
that sense, it was a lot more creative than Battlers, where you're working with fairly pre-existing material. And I think I probably said to you previously that books like Battles That Changed the Galaxy, they're not there to replace the original trilogy of films or the prequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy.
Hmm.
They're there to enhance them. They're
Right.
there to, once you've read Battle of Geonosis, and then you could go and watch Attack of the Clones and maybe get a little bit more out of it. Whereas Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire also exists to show people something they've never seen before of the Empire, and that was really exciting for us. But it also meant that we had to create that stuff and make it feel right. That there was something behind this, that it wasn't just kind of completely coming out of left field. That we were creating something that fit with everything that already existed about the Empire and the other stuff we wanted to bring in about the Empire. So it was really exciting, but also a lot more work because I mean I was contracted for like a 90,000 word book, and in the sense of ideally that's the kind of the limit that we're going for. But if you want to do more than that, that's fine. Which is a terrible thing to say to a historian. Um, because that just gave me permission to massively blow that word count, and as it came in at 120,000 words long. But in that sense, it was a lot more work, because each chapter is, I think I'm right in saying each chapter is about 4,000 words long, and the way that we wrote it was 5 chapters a month. So 4,000 words onto the next one, 4,000 words onto the next one, and then at the end of the month, there you go, and then roll straight into the next one. So it was pretty grueling writing, which was a lot more words than for battles. So yeah, more work, more fun because of the nature of it, but also a little bit more difficult, I think, is probably the easiest way of saying it. It was a challenge. It was a really fun challenge, but it was a challenge.
So, I mean, this raises so many questions. But that pace is absolutely insane. I think it's 24 chapters in the book, if I remember right. Is that right?
Or maybe 27, including the introduction and the conclusion. I can't remember.
25 and then the introduction and the conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that means you're writing a chapter a week. And it's not just the writing, because it's not like, I mean, if there is anybody who has a lot of Star Wars knowledge rattling around in his head, it's you, certainly. But there's a lot, as you say.
Yeah, I don't know everything.
Well,
in that sense, like, you're right. That's how could you can't read and write all of this stuff at the same time. It can't be done.
Right. And there's so much that had to be created for this too. So, I mean, how do you focus your research work on this and do it in such a way as to make sure that you're still able to produce the amount of content at the pace you had to produce it?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big benefits, and I don't think people fully kind of appreciate or understand how the Lucasfilm side of this works for books. So I had a lot of access to Story Group, who, your listeners will be familiar with the concept of Story Group, people who kind of exist to facilitate the creative process. They help with lore and sources and material and like that. So every month when I was working on my 5 chapters for that month, we would send a list of questions for the next 5 to Lucasfilm in advance, so that when we would then swap over, as I would send off my 5 written chapters, and the new answers would come back, so I could start on the next lot, which was tremendously helpful, and just would not be possible to do a book like this, because I can go and look in books and I can check comics and but if I don't know the book or comic exists that I'm supposed to be checking, then I can't do it. You need Lucasfilm to help with all of that stuff.
Right.
So they were incredibly helpful with all of that material. It will be, a mix of banal questions to has anyone ever done X, to I need some specific awful things the Empire has done that we either the stuff that's been established for it, or stuff that we can pad out for it, or kind of bring in some new material for it. And God knows how they dealt with those types of questions coming in every month. I never got to see that end of it, but they delivered as far as I was concerned. This kind of ongoing weird and wonderful list of kind of random queries from some stupid historian in England who was desperately requiring information. And in that sense, it was, hugely collaborative. It weirdly, in a sense, it probably kind of starts to mirror battles, but in a different sense of collaborative. Because, just because my name's on the book, it doesn't mean that, somehow I'm a genius and I'm the only one doing all of this. There's a whole Formula One pit crew surrounding me, providing me with information so that I can keep writing at pace. And yeah, some of the, as now, having read the book, some of the stuff that they're drawing from, there were some really deep cuts going on in there, some really kind of old material or kind of random stuff that gets mentioned in passing that suddenly becomes fair game because this is the book for it.
Right. And I imagine, it's so challenging too, because I know that Lucasfilm is very careful about what they, want to cite and what they don't want to cite. And for all intents and purposes, not painting themselves into corners wherever 100%. They can avoid it. So yeah, it becomes a huge challenge. And then I guess part of your process of pitching the book and developing the book, that gave you the structure then ahead of time. So that way that outline, I guess, was probably already finalized before you got into the writing of things. So you actually had a framework, and then you could say, okay, this is the framework. This is where I'm at in the framework coming up. This is where I need to focus my questions, and I can at least get the process started.
Yeah, pretty much exactly that. So when we got very, very early on, we kind of we selected a few of the chapters that we thought were going to be kind of fairly representative of kind of the structure of the book, but also kind of some of the material, some of the, a chapter. I think one of the chapters was probably on like the genocide chapter or something like that. So we begin to get a flavor of how we might approach some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we got the feedback to those, and obviously, various bits were rewritten because that's the writing process. But once we kind of, okay, this is how it feels like we can make all of this work, then it's just, well, I will go through the book chronologically. Mm-hmm. Chapter 1, fantastic, and you get to the end of that and go, only 24 more to go.
Did you actually write it in chapter order, or
pretty much? Yeah, almost exactly in chapter order, because. And as you'll know of reading it, there are threads that go across the chapters and suddenly becoming clear, both in regards to the nature of the Empire and also in regards to Beaumont Kin, who's our historian. Mm-hmm. And it felt easiest for me to build those threads by doing it in the order that people were going to read it. So right. I could feel as we were going along it where the points were going to start emerging, to start putting material in or referencing in or kind of harking back to things or even harking forward to things that were suddenly going to become much more important as the book continued.
All right, we're going to pause the conversation there, which means we will pick it up tomorrow, and that also means that that's it for today's episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please help me help more people find out about it. You can do that by just telling people that you know that might like a bit of Star Wars podcasting in their life. You can tell the algorithms with your ratings and reviews and likes and comments and follows and subscribes and joins and all that good stuff. And you can even help me as an independent creator keep producing this dose of Star Wars joy, and you can learn more about that at patreon.com/SW7x7. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyrighted by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.